They didn't expect me to hear it. I was in the kitchen adjusting the angle of the serving platter when I heard her voice float in from the dining room. Light, careless, just loud enough to reach me from the hallway. "Make sure that's her glass," she said. "She'll be out before dessert. I don't want her ruining the toast." There was a pause, then my son's muffled voice, too low to catch. Then her again, laughing softly. "It's harmless. She'll sleep like a baby. We just need a peaceful evening for once." I stood completely still. My hand gripped the edge of the countertop until my knuckles ached. My heart didn't race. It stopped, then restarted, slower, heavier, like it now carried more weight than before. They were talking about me. I turned my face toward the mirror above the stove. A ridiculous thing to hang in a kitchen, but my husband Earl had put it there 30 years ago so I could see who was coming up behind me while I cooked. A small square with a wooden frame and a crack across the lower left corner. I saw my own eyes there, calm, flat, unmoving, the way I imagine I looked when I buried Earl. The way I must have looked when my son first told me years ago that Tonya has a different way of doing family. I walked slowly to the dining room. 10 steps. I counted each one. They were standing at the table arranging the cutlery, smiling, not a trace of anything on their faces. She kissed him on the cheek and went to the hallway to get the wine. I didn't say a word. I smiled back, took the water glasses from the table, walked them to the kitchen, poured fresh water, and when I came back, I switched them. Just like that. Her glass for mine, mine for hers. A quiet act. Unnoticed. Final. It was my house, even if they liked to pretend it wasn't. They'd insisted on hosting the dinner here. It's cozier, more traditional, and besides, you've got the best dining room in Savannah. What they meant was that my house looked respectable and familiar. What they meant was that their apartment, with its sleek grays and metal stools, didn't feel like family. What they meant was I was good for appearances. I set the glasses back on the table, sat down, smoothed the front of my navy dress, the one I wore to First Baptist every other Sunday. Tonya returned, holding the wine bottle like she was in a commercial. "Moscato," she said. "Your favorite. Vivian." She used my name like it tasted bitter in her mouth. I nodded. "Lovely." The others arrived one by one. My older grandson, Jalen, distracted as always, glancing at his phone every few minutes. My younger granddaughter, Imani, polite and sweet, helping with napkins without being asked. The table filled, the candles flickered, the smothered chicken cooled slightly while Tonya fussed about lighting. Then came the first sip. Tonya raised her glass for a toast. "To family," she said, "to patience and to keeping things civil." That earned a few confused glances, a tight chuckle from my son, a silence that lingered too long. She drank. I watched her throat move as she swallowed. Then I took my glass and raised it slightly. Didn't drink. Dinner began. Conversations about schools, promotions, a vacation someone might take in July. Nothing about me, except when Tonya turned and said brightly, "I hope the collard greens aren't too salty for your blood pressure, Vivian." I smiled at her. "We'll find out, won't we?" She didn't catch the tone. She never did. 20 minutes later, she started blinking more often, rubbed her temple, sipped more water. Her fork slowed. "Are you all right?" I asked gently, almost kindly. "Fine," she mumbled. "Just tired." Another 10 minutes, and she was pale. Her posture slackened, her words slurred just enough for everyone to notice, but no one said anything until she slumped sideways in her chair. Jalen jumped up. Imani gasped. My son stood still. "Tonya," he said. I rose slowly, took her glass, carried it back to the kitchen, and poured the rest down the drain. I didn't say a word. They laid her on the couch, called an ambulance. The diagnosis would be exhaustion, low blood sugar, perhaps stress. No one would ask what was really in that glass, and I would say nothing. I didn't need to. My son didn't ride in the ambulance. He stayed back, dazed, muttering something about how she's been working too much. I walked him to the door after the medics left. The house was quiet again. "You should rest too, Mama," he said. His eyes didn't meet mine. "I will," I replied. He turned to leave. "I heard you," I said. "Just that, nothing more." He froze, then walked out into the night, and I closed the door. The silence after they left was different. Not peaceful, not sad, just full. Like something had finally landed after floating in the air for years. I sat in the living room, hands folded on my lap, and watched the dark settle over the porch. Tonya's perfume still lingered faintly in the cushions. Some expensive thing she wore too much of, sharp, floral, insistent. Even passed out, she managed to leave her mark. I didn't feel guilt. That surprised me. I expected some trembling, some doubt. But all I felt was clarity, like a fog had lifted. I picked up the wine glasses, the plates they left behind, and began clearing the table. No one had finished their food. The smothered chicken had gone cold, the collard greens limp, the cornbread untouched. Imani had taken her napkin and folded it into a perfect little triangle before leaving. That girl had a good heart. I hoped she would survive this family with it intact. In the kitchen, I scrubbed the dishes like it was any other night, like nothing unusual had happened. But it had, and it didn't begin tonight. It began long before. Years ago, I would have laughed at the idea of such a thing. That my son's wife would try to drug me just to keep me quiet during a family dinner. But then again, years ago, I used to believe that kindness alone built family. Tonya had always disliked me, subtly at first. Gentle corrections about how I spoke. "You mean quinoa, not quinoa, Vivian. It's pronounced charcuterie, not that meat board thing." Then came the bigger ones. "You really should stay out of our parenting choices. Vivian, your decor is so heritage. Code for outdated, low class, embarrassing." She came from money. Not old money, not generational wealth. Flashy money, the kind that gets spent quickly and loudly. Designer clothes, weekly spa visits, a car that cost more than my house. And somehow, despite all that, they were always behind on bills. That's where I came in. My son Calvin was no better. He didn't defend me, didn't contradict her, just smoothed things over. "She doesn't mean it like that, Mama. Tonya's just stressed. You're being too sensitive. Let's not make a thing out of it." I didn't make a thing out of it for years. I signed checks, helped with the down payment on their house, covered private school fees when Jalen started slipping behind, paid off their credit card debt once, quietly, after they asked for a small favor. I never told anyone. That was my mistake. They got used to it. Started acting like it was expected, like I owed it to them just for being alive. And I took it because Calvin was my only child. Because I thought if I kept giving, eventually I'd be part of their lives again. Not just a backup wallet, but a mother, a grandmother. I thought if I stayed useful, I'd stay wanted. Tonight proved otherwise. They didn't just want me silent. They wanted me unconscious, out of the picture, an obstacle to their performance of unity and polish. I washed Tonya's wine glass last, watched the soap run down the stem, the rim where her lipstick had left a faint mark. I rinsed it carefully, set it on the rack to dry. Then I wiped down the counters, turned off the kitchen light, and went to bed. I didn't sleep. My mind replayed their conversation in loops. Her voice, confident, careless, talking about me like I was a dog to be tranquilized. I used to say nothing. When they left me off the Christmas card. When they told the neighbors that Vivian was just a friend helping out with childcare. When I offered a suggestion and got a patronizing smile in return. I swallowed it all. Not anymore. In the morning, I dressed without rush. Same routine. Soft slacks, cardigan, the pearl brooch my husband Earl gave me the Christmas before he passed. I made tea, sat by the window. The garden needed weeding, but I let it be. Today wasn't for that. My phone buzzed around 9:17 a.m. A message from Imani. "Grandma, is everything okay? That was so weird last night. Dad said Tonya fainted because she hadn't eaten all day, but I don't know. She looked strange. You okay? I smiled. Bless that girl. I replied. I'm perfectly fine, sweetheart. Thank you for checking. And yes, something was strange. I didn't say more. Not yet. She deserved the truth, but not in a text message. I would talk to her soon. When it was time. I spent the morning reviewing my bank statements. 3 accounts, 1 savings, 1 checking, and 1 I hadn't touched in over a year. My name on every document, and Calvin's on several. I had forgotten how many payments I'd automated in their name. Cell phones, car insurance, school fees, a gym membership I'd never used. It was all there in black and white. They used my money to build their life, and now they'd tried to erase me from it. I closed the laptop gently and called the bank. The voice on the other end of the line was young, chipper, too bright for 9:30 in the morning. Good morning, Ms. Chambers. This is Keisha at First Savannah Federal. How can I assist you today? I paused before answering. My hand rested on the notepad beside the phone where I'd scribbled every recurring payment I could remember. My handwriting looked steadier than I felt. Yes. Hello. I need to review some authorizations on my accounts, and I'd like to suspend a number of automatic transfers. Possibly all of them. There was a beat of silence. Of course, Ms. Chambers. I can assist with that. May I verify your identity first? We went through the standard dance. Last 4 digits of my social, the name of my late husband, the answer to a security question I'd forgotten I'd even set. Perfect, she said finally. I see you have 3 active accounts with us. There are currently 72 automatic transactions scheduled. Would you like to cancel specific ones or suspend everything for now? Everything, I said. My voice didn't shake. I'd half expected it to, but it came out clear and steady. I almost didn't recognize it. All right, Keisha replied, now more serious. I'm initiating a suspension of all scheduled payments effective immediately. They'll be paused until we receive further instructions from you in writing or in person. I thanked her, hung up, and stared at the phone. So that's how it starts, I thought. Not with a bang, not with a confrontation, just a quiet call to a cheerful stranger, a flip of a switch in some system. And now the bloodline of their finances, their real dependency, was cut off. By lunch, the first text came in. It was from Calvin. Hey, did something happen with the phone plan? Mine's not working. I didn't answer. Let him wonder. I made myself a plate. Nothing fancy, just leftover collard greens and cornbread from what didn't get touched last night. I took it out to the porch and sat in the wicker chair with the peeling armrest, the one Tonya always made a face at. Funny, that armrest had outlasted her decency. The air was warm, thick and sweet the way Savannah gets in September. Spanish moss hung low from the oaks across the street like it was eavesdropping. I watched a neighbor mow his lawn in slow, careful stripes, and remembered how Earl used to do the same every Saturday morning after he got home from the deacons' meeting. I wondered if he were here, what he'd have said about all this. He wouldn't have been surprised. He saw things I didn't, warned me gently years ago. Vivian, he said once, if they only come around when there's a check involved, they're not visiting you. They're visiting the money. Back then, I brushed it off. Told him he was being cynical. Now I thought, no, he was just tired. Tired of watching me get chipped away piece by piece. Around 2 o'clock, the doorbell rang. I knew before I opened it who it was. Calvin. His shirt was wrinkled, unusual for him. His hair hadn't been combed. He looked like a man who'd been chasing an explanation all morning and still hadn't found one. Mama, he said, stepping inside before I could say yes or no. I need to ask you something. I didn't invite him to sit. He stood in the living room, glancing around like he was looking for something. Maybe he was. Did you talk to the bank? I did. Why? He said it like it was a real question, like it was unexpected. You know why, I said simply. His face changed. flickered through irritation, confusion, something else I couldn't name. Then it settled into that careful, measured expression he used when dealing with clients. He folded his hands together. Mama, Tonya's been under a lot of stress lately. She didn't mean anything by what she said. It was just poor wording. She was nervous about the evening going smoothly. That's all. You're calling it poor wording? She didn't drug you, he said quickly, eyes widening. You're jumping to conclusions. It was just a supplement. She uses melatonin herself. Thought it might help you relax. She put it in my glass without telling me. He hesitated. Yes. Okay. That part was not great. I almost laughed at that. Not great. I said nothing. Just stood there, arms folded, waiting to see where he'd go next. He exhaled. Look, I'm not saying it was the right call, but she thought. We both thought that sometimes these dinners get tense. You know how you get. How I get. I repeated. You make these comments, Mama, about her, about the house, the kids. I pay for the house, I interrupted. That stopped him. I paid the down payment. I paid the mortgage every month for 6 years. I paid for the kids' school, your insurance, Tonya's medical bills. I paid for the groceries when your credit card was declined last spring. I know because the bank called me about it. So if I made a few comments over dinner, I think I earned the right. His mouth opened, closed. You've taken my money, I said. And in return, you tried to put me to sleep like an inconvenient child. It wasn't like that. Was it your idea? I asked. Or did you just let her say it and stay quiet? He didn't answer. We stood in silence for a moment. Finally, he asked, softer. So that's it. You're cutting us off? I'm cutting myself loose, I said. From the kitchen, the tea kettle started to whistle. I turned calmly and went to pour myself a cup. I used to think silence was strength. That if I kept the peace, held my tongue, smiled when it hurt, I was being noble. That good mothers endure. That decent women forgive. That it's better to be unthanked than to be bitter. That was before I saw my son standing in my living room trying to explain away a drugged wine glass like it was a social slip. After he left, without tea, without an apology, I sat at the kitchen table and stared at the steam rising from my cup. It curled slowly like a quiet goodbye. I didn't cry. I hadn't cried in years. That used to bother me. Now I saw it as proof that I'd stopped expecting tenderness from the people who should have known how to give it. The next day, I opened the drawer in the hallway console, the one I hadn't looked in for years. It held files, warranties, loose batteries, and a thick manila envelope with Calvin's name written in my handwriting. I emptied it out onto the table. There they were. Copies of checks, receipts, loan agreements never repaid, birthday cards with "Thank you for everything" scribbled next to numbers that had more zeros than any gift should. 17 years of generosity. No. 17 years of trying to buy my place in a family that had slowly decided I was just optional. I looked at one check for $6,200, labeled nursery furniture. That was when Tonya was pregnant with Jalen. She'd cried on the phone, said she didn't want her baby sleeping in second-hand junk. I wired the money the same day. Another $12,000, listed as bridge loan until bonus comes through. It never did. And the biggest one, $45,000. Down payment on the house. They'd had champagne that night. I remember because Calvin sent a photo of the cork and said, "Wouldn't have popped this without you, Mama." I didn't frame that photo. It wasn't just the money. It was the little things. Tonya had a way of correcting me in front of others. "Vivian, I think you meant to say aesthetic, not just nice looking. Don't tell the kids those old stories. They're a little outdated." Calvin would laugh like it was charming. They never hit me, never shouted, just chipped away, slow and soft, until I started doubting my own place at the table. So I stayed quiet. When Jalen forgot to call me on my birthday, I said nothing. When Imani's choir recital at church went by without an invitation, I pretended I hadn't heard about it. When Tonya planned holidays without even asking if I'd be free, I made other plans alone, because it was easier than making a scene. Because I thought they'd come around. They didn't. I pulled out a fresh notepad and began writing. Not a letter, not yet, but a list. Payments. Dates. Patterns. It was long. At the bottom, I drew a line and wrote one sentence. A person's worth is not measured by what they give, but by how they're treated when they stop giving. Then I picked up the phone and called Imani. She answered on the second ring. Grandma. Her voice was bright, cautious, like she wasn't sure if I'd be angry. That hurt more than anything. Hi, sweetheart, I said. You asked me yesterday if everything was okay. Yeah. You seemed different. I need to tell you something, I said. But not over the phone. Can you come by after school? Of course, she said immediately. Do you want me to bring anything? Just yourself. She came that afternoon, walked in like she always did, quietly, respectfully, with her backpack slung over one shoulder and that little frown she got when she was thinking hard. We sat at the table. I didn't offer snacks. I didn't ask about school. I just told her the truth. About the glass, about what I heard, about what I did. She didn't speak for a long time. Then she said, "She's been weird with you for years." That surprised me. I noticed it when I was 10, she said. I remember you gave me a bracelet and she said it wasn't my style, and Dad just let her. I nodded slowly. Imani looked at me, then down at her hands. Are you okay? I am now, I said. I'm sorry. You don't need to be. You didn't do any of it. She took a breath, then asked, "What happens now?" I'm not sure, I said. But it's going to be different. She didn't push. Just reached across the table and squeezed my hand. That night, I wrote a letter. Not to Calvin. Not yet. To my lawyer. I asked for an appointment. And I slept well for the first time in months. The law office smelled like old wood and copy paper. That sterile sort of calm that makes you sit up straighter, even if no one asks you to. I hadn't been there in years. Not since I updated my will after Earl died. Back then, I'd left everything to Calvin, because who else was there? Now I was here for a different reason. The receptionist recognized me. She smiled politely, offered tea. I declined. Ms. Chambers, Mr. Whitfield will see you now, she said a few minutes later. James Whitfield was nearing 70 himself. Thin, sharp-eyed, hands as still as a surgeon's. He'd drawn up my first will back when Calvin was still in high school. We'd been acquaintances for decades, not friends exactly, but familiar in the way black professionals in a small southern city often become. Same church directory, same fundraiser dinners, same nod across the aisle at First Baptist. "Vivian," he said warmly, rising as I entered. "It's been a while." "Too long," I said, shaking his hand. "I need to make some changes." He nodded and gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Tell me what you're thinking." I laid out the facts slowly, without drama. He listened without interrupting, only nodding occasionally, scribbling on a legal pad with his fountain pen. When I got to the part about the wine glass, the switch, he set the pen down and looked at me over his glasses. "Do you want to press charges?" he asked quietly. "No," I said. He didn't ask why. Instead, he opened a file drawer and pulled out my last will. Flipped to the second page. "Currently, Calvin is the sole beneficiary. You're still listed as executor, and you designated him power of attorney if you become incapacitated. Do you want to remove him from all of that?" "Yes. And replace him with my granddaughter Imani." He didn't blink. Just made a note. "I'd also like to create a trust," I said. "A separate account. Protected. For Imani's education, housing, her future. Something no one else can touch. Not her parents, not her brother, not me once it's set." James raised an eyebrow. "That can be done. I'd suggest a revocable living trust with a named successor trustee, preferably someone outside the family." I nodded. Can you be that person? He smiled faintly. Happy to. But I'll need to verify with her first that she understands what's being offered. She doesn't know yet, I said. Not the details. She will soon, he replied, and began drawing up the paperwork. It took 2 hours. Signing, initialing, reviewing clause after clause. I felt no hesitation, just a calm sense of direction, like I was finally walking the path I should have taken years ago. When it was done, I felt lighter. Not euphoric, just unburdened. Outside, the sun had shifted westward. The light was different, softer, the way late afternoon looks in Savannah when the Spanish moss catches gold. I stopped by Sister Ruth's bakery on the way home and bought a sweet potato pie. Imani's favorite. It felt like the right thing to have waiting. The next morning, Calvin called. I didn't pick up. A few minutes later, a message came through. I just got a notification from the mortgage company. Payment bounced. What's going on? Can you call me back? I stared at the screen, then set the phone down and went to water my plants. Let him sit in the silence for a while. I'd lived in his for years. Later that afternoon, Imani came by again. This time she had a stack of school papers with her and a worried look in her eyes. I think Dad's starting to freak out, she said, dropping into the kitchen chair. I poured her some lemonade. He should have thought about that before letting Tonya put drugs in a wine glass, I said calmly. Imani winced. He says it wasn't like that. I know what I heard. I believe you. I sat across from her and slid the pie across the table. Sweet potato. I remembered. She smiled. That same soft, grateful smile I used to get from Calvin when he was a boy and I made his favorite fried catfish and hush puppies on Friday nights. Before the distance, before the expectations. I made a decision, I said. I changed my will. Her eyes widened. You what? I took your father out. Removed him as beneficiary, as executor, as power of attorney. I named you instead. Me. Yes, you. And I set up a trust for your future. She sat back, stunned. Grandma, I don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything, I said. Just promise me something. Anything. Don't ever let people take your kindness as permission. Imani nodded. Her eyes were glassy. I didn't do this to punish them, I said. I did it because I want what I built to go to someone who sees me. Not just what I can give. I do see you, she whispered. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt like someone's mother again. Not because of what I could provide, but because I was finally being heard. The first bill notice arrived 3 days later. A pale yellow envelope with Calvin's name in bold type, but my address listed as the billing source. A leftover from when I used to handle the mail while they were getting organized after moving in. I opened it out of habit more than concern. Past due. Mortgage. Insurance. 1 bounced. 1 suspended. I set the letter on the counter and made myself tea. It wasn't my problem anymore. Later that afternoon, the bank called to confirm the final closure of all recurring transfers. A pleasant woman named Denise read the list back to me. Cell plans, utilities, tuition support, 2 gym memberships, and something labeled Executive Essentials Monthly. I didn't even want to know what that one was. All cancelled, she said. Would you like printed copies for your records? Yes, please, I said. And could you send them to my attorney as well? James Whitfield. Absolutely. That was that. No ceremony, just a phone call and a quiet erasure of financial strings I had tied myself up in for nearly 2 decades. The silence after felt whole. I didn't realize how much noise I'd been living with. Not just the literal noise of texts, calls, requests, but the mental weight. The invisible math of being generous. Of calculating what wouldn't cause a fight, what would earn me just enough inclusion to not feel erased. They used to make it sound like I was doing it all out of obligation. You're always so generous, Mama, Calvin would say with that gentle tone that now felt like sandpaper. You've always loved to help. Yes, I had. But I'd also learned to mistake help for currency. A trade for a place at the table. Not anymore. By the weekend, I began rearranging the house. Slowly, deliberately. Not redecorating, just reclaiming. I took down the stiff grey curtains Tonya once insisted were more modern. I put the floral ones back up, the ones she rolled her eyes at. I liked them. They reminded me of mornings when Earl was alive, humming hymns while making coffee as I tied back the sashes. I packed up a shelf of gifts they'd given me over the years. Mostly things that came with passive-aggressive notes. A book on updating your look after 60. A blender I never used. A necklace too bold for my taste that Tonya picked out and Calvin wrapped. I put them in a box, labeled it donation, and set it by the door. I was clearing space, literally and otherwise. Monday, Imani came over again after school. She found me sitting on the floor in the living room, surrounded by old photo albums. I hadn't looked at them in years. It had always felt too heavy. She sat beside me without asking. I found some, I said, holding up a page with Calvin at 6, beaming next to a sandcastle at Tybee Island. Imani smiled. He looks like Jalen. I nodded. He used to laugh so loud people turned around in restaurants. Even at church, Pastor Williams used to say that boy got the Holy Ghost early. Imani traced the edge of the photo. What happened? I shook my head. I don't know the exact day it changed. It wasn't dramatic, just slow. He got older, got quieter, met Tonya. Things started getting small between us. Tighter. Like he was shrinking away from who we were. He shouldn't have let her treat you like that, Imani said quietly. No, I agreed. But I let it happen too. I wanted peace more than I wanted truth. We flipped a few more pages. Birthdays, holidays, Easter Sundays. One picture of me holding baby Imani in a hospital chair, my eyes puffy from crying. I remembered that day. She'd come 3 weeks early. Calvin had panicked. I held her all night while Tonya slept, singing the same lullaby my mother sang to me. Imani looked at it for a long time. I don't remember that, she said. You were just a few hours old. She hesitated. Do you ever think about cutting him off completely? Like, not talking to him at all? I think about it, I said. But I'm not sure it's about punishment anymore. It's about peace. If he can be in my life without demanding anything from me, I'm open to that. But I won't pay for love anymore. That chapter's over. Imani didn't say anything. Just leaned her head lightly against my shoulder. After she left, I got a call from a blocked number. I let it ring, then listened to the voicemail. Tonya. Her voice sounded strained, forced, too sweet by half. Vivian, I think we should talk. There's been some misunderstandings. Calvin told me you've been feeling hurt. That's really unfortunate. I think we could all benefit from clearing the air. Maybe we could do brunch. I know a lovely new spot on Broughton Street. I replayed the message once, just to hear the way she said unfortunate, as if my feelings were a scheduling conflict. I didn't call back. Not because I was angry, but because I knew what that brunch would be. A performance, an apology laced with conditions, a plea for restoring balance. What she really wanted was access. Access to me, to my money, to my silence. She could keep waiting. That evening, I sat by the window with a blanket and watched the sun dip behind the live oaks. The porch light clicked on automatically, a soft yellow halo over the chair I'd reclaimed, the one with the peeling armrest. And for the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for a call. I wasn't hoping to be included. I wasn't adjusting myself to fit inside someone else's version of family. I was simply home. And it was enough. The first message from Jalen came the next morning. It was short, stiff, polite, like he was writing to a teacher he didn't really like. Hey Grandma. Dad said you're mad at everyone. Just wanted to say I hope you're okay. I stared at it for a while. The words weren't cruel, but they weren't curious either. No question, no real concern. Just a vague hope that whatever disruption I'd caused would resolve itself and the machinery would keep running smoothly. He'd always been like that. Hands off. A nice boy, but trained early to keep a safe distance from discomfort. I didn't answer. An hour later, Imani called. "Jalen just texted me," she said. "He said you're mad at everyone." "I'm not mad," I replied. "I'm done." There was a silence on the line, then a soft laugh. "Good," she said. Imani had been checking in every day now. Not out of obligation, I would have felt that, but just being there. Sometimes she came over, sometimes she called. Once she dropped off a bag of peaches from the farmer's market on Forsyth because she said I made the best cobbler and she was tired of the store-bought kind. I didn't realize how thirsty I'd been for that kind of attention. Simple, quiet, undemanding. That same afternoon, another message came in. This one from Calvin. "Can we talk? Not about money. Just talk." I didn't reply. Instead, I turned off the phone and went out to the garden. The weeds had gotten bold while I was busy handling everyone else's life. I dug in with my hands, pulled root after root, clearing space for air and sun. It felt good. Honest. Messy. Real. That evening, I baked bread. The house filled with warmth and the smell of something rising. I didn't realize how much I'd missed that. The slow miracle of flour and water becoming something alive. Like Sunday mornings when I used to bake biscuits before church and the whole house smelled like grace. I sat by the window with a slice, still warm, no butter, just a little honey. The porch light flicked on. I didn't look at my phone. When it rang again after dark, I let it go to voicemail. This time the voice was Tonya's mother. That one surprised me. "Vivian, this is Vanessa. I know things have been tense lately, but I wanted to say I never meant for you to feel excluded. I assumed Calvin and Tonya were involving you in the planning. If I had known." She paused. "Well, I just wanted to reach out. For what it's worth, I always admired how you carried yourself. Even at that church picnic when Tonya said those things, you never lost your composure. I didn't know what to make of that. Maybe she meant it. Maybe she just heard about the cancelled payments. Either way, it didn't change anything. The next day, the florist delivered a bouquet of white lilies. No note, just a typed card. "Thinking of you." I snorted. There wasn't a lily in the world that could undo what had been done. I gave the flowers to Mrs. Cartwright next door. Her husband had been in the hospital last week. At least she'd appreciate them. Later that week, I made an appointment at the credit union. Not the same bank Calvin used. I wanted a clean break. A young woman helped me set up a separate account. One for Imani's trust, and one just for me. My name only. No shared access, no cosigners, no just in case. When she asked if I wanted to link any family members for emergency contact, I shook my head. "I've already had that emergency," I said. I handled it. Back home, I found a handwritten letter in my mailbox. Imani. She'd written me a real letter, on lined paper with her neat, loopy handwriting, like mine had once been. She wrote about how things felt strange at home. How Calvin was quieter than usual. How Tonya pretended nothing had happened. How Jalen kept asking if I was coming over for Sunday dinner. "They don't get it," she wrote. "They think you're being dramatic or difficult. But I see what's happening. You're setting a line, and I respect it." Then one sentence I read twice. "You taught me how to make cobbler, but now you're teaching me how to have a backbone." I folded the letter and placed it in the drawer where I kept Earl's watch, an old church program from his funeral, and the only photo I still displayed of Calvin as a boy. The next day, I walked to the post office and bought a box of stationery. If they were going to start writing, I'd respond in kind. But only to the ones who wrote with truth. Not lilies, not voicemails, not white lies hidden in expensive paper. Words. Honest ones. I wrote Imani back that evening. No advice, no preaching. Just told her about the bread, about the lilies, about the garden finally getting its space again. And I ended with this. Kindness is a gift, sweetheart, but it's not a contract. Never forget the difference. I sealed the letter and smiled. Let the silence stretch on if it wanted. I was no longer afraid of it. The letter from Calvin arrived on a Thursday. Not an email, not a text. A real envelope, my name in his handwriting, careful, almost too neat, like he'd taken his time, like he wanted the effort to show. I didn't open it right away. I let it sit on the table while I boiled water for tea, sorted the laundry, refolded the kitchen towels. I moved around it, aware of it the way you're aware of a sore tooth. Not painful, but persistent. When I finally slid it open, I braced for excuses. But it wasn't that. It started with a sentence I hadn't seen from him in years. Mama, I'm sorry. No qualifiers, no spin. Just that. He went on. Said he hadn't realized how much he'd relied on me, how easy it had become to let Tonya run the show while he stayed neutral. He admitted that he heard her that night in the dining room, that he'd been too afraid to stop her. I knew what she meant, and I didn't stop her. I thought it would keep things smooth. I see now what that says about me. He didn't ask for money. He didn't mention the cancelled payments. Instead, he wrote about memories. How I used to hum gospel while doing the dishes. How he'd wake up on Sunday mornings to the smell of biscuits and coffee. How I made his favorite chicken soup when he had the flu and sat by his bed reading the same storybook over and over until he fell asleep. How after Earl died, I held everything together without ever asking anyone to hold me. Somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing you as a person and started seeing you as a function. A role. A resource. I hate that it took something so ugly for me to realize it. At the end, he asked nothing. He just said he hoped I was okay. That he was trying to understand what came next. That he wanted to earn the right to be in my life again, if I'd let him. I folded the letter slowly, set it aside. I didn't know how I felt. I'd spent so long waiting for that kind of apology that now, having it, I wasn't sure what to do with it. It didn't erase anything. It didn't make what happened better. But it was something. And maybe it wasn't for me to decide right then what came of it. Later that day, I went into town to see James Whitfield. The documents for the trust were ready for final signatures. He greeted me with his usual quiet smile. We sat in his office, the thick file between us, and went over everything one more time. The trust is fully funded, he said, adjusting his glasses. Disbursement begins when Imani turns 25, with provisions for education and housing before that if needed. All conditions are locked. Only she can access the funds. No co-signers, no transfers. I nodded. She'll be protected, he added. You did this right. She deserves it, I said. James hesitated, then added gently. I've worked with a lot of families over the years, Vivian. Most people don't do this. Not unless there's a lot of anger behind it. There was, I said. But not anymore. Not exactly. He didn't press. I signed the last document. Just a name on a line, but it felt like sealing a chapter. On the way out, I stopped by Sister Ruth's again and picked up 2 slices of red velvet cake. One for me, one for Imani. I didn't know if she'd be by that day, but it felt right. I got home just as the mail truck rolled up. Another envelope. This one from Tonya. I nearly tossed it in the trash without opening it, but I didn't. It was 1 page, printed, not handwritten. Polite. Cold. She wrote that she hoped I was well, that she regretted how things had been perceived, and that she wanted to rebuild bridges. She asked to meet for brunch, her treat, at one of those new spots downtown where everything was plated on slate and tasted like salt and air. There was no apology. Only optics. I folded the letter once and slid it into the drawer where I kept coupons and spare batteries. A waiting room for things I didn't know what to do with yet. That evening, Imani came by. I handed her the cake and told her the trust was official. She stared at me. What does that mean? It means no one can take your future from you, I said. Not even you, if you're being foolish. She laughed, then paused. Is it a lot? It's enough, I said. She didn't ask for numbers. I liked that about her. We sat on the porch eating, watching the last light leave the sky. The fireflies were just starting to flicker in the yard, the way they do in Savannah when summer's holding on but fall is whispering. Dad wrote me a letter, I said eventually. She looked over. And I believe he means it. But believing someone's regret doesn't mean you hand them a key again. She nodded. Do you think you'll forgive him? I already did, I said. But that doesn't mean I'm letting him back in the house. Imani didn't argue. We finished our cake in silence, the kind that doesn't ache. That night, I slept with the window open. The air was cooler now. September was shifting toward fall, the kind of fall I liked. Not curated, not Instagram-worthy. Just plain, honest weather. I woke up once around midnight and stood by the window. The street was empty. No cars, no footsteps. Just the hum of quiet houses and the distant song of cicadas. Mine no longer felt like a waiting room. It felt like a home again. I wasn't expecting them to show up at my door. Not like that. It was late afternoon, the kind of day where the air hangs heavy and still just before a storm rolls in off the coast. I'd been out in the backyard pulling weeds from the far corner of the garden, the one no one ever helped me with, when I heard the car. I knew the engine before I saw it. Calvin's sedan. Always a little too clean, always parked just a little too straight. I stood up, wiped my hands on my pants, and watched them get out. Both of them. Calvin looked tired, older than I remembered. But it was Tonya who caught my eye. Dressed down, hair pulled back, no makeup, which was rare for her. She always presented herself like she expected a camera to appear at any moment. But today she looked normal. Small, almost. I didn't move. Calvin lifted a hand in a little wave. Mama, he said. Can we talk? I didn't answer. Just turned and walked toward the porch. If they wanted a conversation, they could have it on my ground. They followed me up the steps like children unsure if they were still in trouble. I didn't offer chairs. Didn't invite them in. Tonya spoke first. I know I'm probably the last person you want to see. You're not wrong, I said. She swallowed. I came to say something, and not just because of the money, though I'd be lying if I said we weren't affected. I waited. She glanced at Calvin, who gave her a small nod. I'm sorry, she said. For everything. The dinner, the glass. I shouldn't have done that. I was trying to control a situation that wasn't mine to control. It was selfish and wrong. Her voice was flat. Practiced. Not robotic, but careful, like someone trying to walk across ice without slipping. I didn't speak. I wasn't raised to ask for help, she continued. And when you kept giving it money, time, space, I told myself it was just your way of being. I didn't think about what it cost you. I didn't want to. Still, I said nothing. Calvin stepped forward. We came because we know we can't undo it. But we don't want to pretend anymore. I don't. I looked at them both for a long time. Then I said, I've already forgiven you. They blinked. But forgiveness doesn't come with a seat at my table. Not yet. Calvin nodded slowly. I understand. Tonya, to her credit, didn't argue. I spent a long time thinking I could earn love with usefulness, I said. That if I just stayed helpful, no one would throw me away. They shifted, uncomfortable. I'm not angry anymore, I added. But I'm not available either. That seemed to land. Calvin looked down. Is there anything we can do? I thought about that. You can stop trying to manage the narrative. Don't tell the kids I'm being difficult. Don't play the victim. Just say the truth. I set boundaries you didn't like. He nodded. And, I added, you can live with the consequences. If money is tight, figure it out. You're grown people. You have jobs, a house, a car I helped you buy. Figure it out the way I had to when I was 35 and widowed with a child and nobody handing me a check every month. The way my mother did when Daddy left and she raised 4 kids cleaning other people's houses. We figured it out. You will too. Tonya's face twitched. Just a little. I wasn't sure if it was shame or pride trying to stay intact. That's fair, Calvin said quietly. I stepped back toward the door. If you want to visit again, write first. No unannounced appearances. No requests. No strings. They both murmured agreement. I didn't hug them, didn't reach out. Just nodded and stepped inside, closing the screen door behind me. I watched through the curtain as they got back into the car. No fight, no dramatics. Just 2 people finally realizing they'd lost access to something they thought was permanent. The next morning, Imani stopped by. I told her they'd come. What did you say? She asked. The truth. Imani smiled faintly. I bet that rattled them. They'll survive, I said. We all do. She looked around the living room. It's so quiet here now. I like the quiet, I said. It tells me when someone's voice matters. That afternoon, I sat down with a new notepad. I started a list. Not of payments, but of things I wanted. Small things. Join the quilting circle at church. Walk through Forsyth Park on a weekday morning when it's empty. Find my old recipe for lemon bars and see if it's still as good as I remember. Call Pearl and laugh about something that happened 40 years ago. I hadn't made a list like that in years. I always made lists for others. Shopping, bills, gifts, favors. This one was mine. And it felt like a beginning. Freedom doesn't always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it creeps in slowly, like light under a closed door. That's how it felt the morning after they came. I woke up before the sun. No alarm, no reason, just eyes open, body rested. I got up, made coffee the old-fashioned way, percolator on the stove the way Earl taught me, and sat on the porch with a blanket over my knees. The street was still asleep. No cars, no sprinklers, no barking dogs. Just stillness, and me in it. Not as an intruder, not as a prop, but as the owner of my own time. I watched the light grow inch by inch across the yard. Pale at first, then gold, filtering through the moss and magnolia leaves. The kind of morning you notice more when you're not distracted by what others need from you. I wasn't weak. I was patient. That's the part no one understood. They thought my silence meant agreement, that my quiet was consent. But it wasn't. It was endurance. It was a long-held breath. And now I was exhaling. Finally. Fully. After breakfast, I cleaned out the hallway closet. Not out of necessity, just because I wanted the space. I found coats that didn't fit. Board games no one played. A pair of shoes Calvin gave me years ago that pinched my toes but looked appropriate for church luncheons. Into the donation bag they went. I kept one thing, though. An old cardigan with fraying sleeves. Earl's. It still smelled faintly of cedar and Old Spice and something warm I could never name. I held it for a moment, then folded it neatly and set it on the bed. Some things you keep not for function, but for memory. Around noon, Imani called. You sound good, she said, halfway surprised. I feel good. Did they say anything after they left? No, I said. And that's just fine. I didn't need follow-ups. I didn't need explanations. They'd had their moment. I'd had mine. The rest would take care of itself. Or it wouldn't. That part wasn't up to me anymore. After we hung up, I drove to the garden center out past Victory Drive. Bought herbs for the garden. Basil, thyme, rosemary, simple things. I'd neglected that corner of my life for too long. I wanted to grow something that didn't require apology. Back home, I spent the afternoon planting. Hands in the dirt, sun on my back, the smell of Georgia earth warm and alive. The kind of quiet work that makes you forget you ever worried about things like bank statements or strained smiles over smothered chicken. The phone rang once. Calvin again. I let it go to voicemail. He didn't leave a message this time. That I decided was progress. Later, I opened the drawer where I'd kept his letter. Reread it. Still honest, still painful, but less sharp now, like a wound that had scabbed over. I put it back, then picked up the letter Imani wrote and read that again too. I found myself smiling at the line about the backbone. She was growing one too. And that mattered more than anything else. That night, I cooked for myself. Not leftovers. Not something frozen. Real food. Shrimp and grits with andouille sausage and a little too much butter, the way I liked it, the way Earl used to request every Friday night. I ate it slowly at the table I used to dread, the one where too many tense dinners had played out like bad theater. But now it was just a table. Just a woman eating shrimp and grits with music playing low from the kitchen radio. Al Green. Earl's favorite. No one interrupted. No one asked for seconds. No one picked at the food or said it was a bit heavy. Just me. Eating. Living. It struck me mid-bite how rare that had become. For years, I'd been a provider, a buffer, a quiet shadow in the background of someone else's life. The dependable one. The helper. The bank. Now I was just a woman with a plate of food, a glass of sweet tea, and a house that no longer echoed with quiet resentment. I thought back to that night. The dinner, the glass, the slow collapse of pretense. I remembered Tonya's face just before she slumped, and Calvin's panic, and my own calm. How still I'd been. Not vengeful, not angry. Just done. Some people need drama to end a story. I needed stillness. That was my exit, and my return. I went to bed early that night. Not out of exhaustion but because I could. Because no one needed me to stay up to answer questions or transfer money or listen to complaints about other people's choices. Because peace, when it finally comes, asks nothing of you except presence. And I was fully present, for once, in my own life. When I turned off the light, I thought to myself, almost absently, they thought I was weak. But I was patient. And I was right. 2 weeks passed without a word. No texts, no visits, no apologies wrapped in flowers or guilt disguised as concern. And it was the most peace I'd had in years. I spent the time doing small things. Things I used to rush through or put off. I repainted the back door. Organized the pantry. Even stitched a tear in the living room curtain I'd ignored for nearly a decade. Not because any of it mattered really, but because it was mine to tend to. Without supervision, without commentary, without being told there was a better way to do it. That was the difference. I wasn't being watched anymore. When you live with people, or even just near them, who think they know better than you, everything becomes performative. Every choice you make is up for quiet debate. Even silence starts to feel like judgment. But now the quiet felt like breath. One morning, I made pancakes just for myself. Not for grandkids, not for guests. Just because I wanted them. I made them the way I liked. Crisp edges, too much butter, a little vanilla in the batter. I sat by the window watching the sun move across the kitchen tile, and thought, this is what a second life feels like. That afternoon, I took out my recipe box. The old one. Wood, chipped in the corners, the cards inside smudged with flour and grease from years of use. I hadn't touched it in ages. Tonya didn't care for my recipes. Said they were too heavy, too old-fashioned. Once even asked if I could try cooking with less soul, whatever that meant. Chilly, the audacity. But Imani had asked me once years ago, if I'd write them all down for her someday. So I began. One card at a time. Not just the ingredients, the stories too. Where the recipe came from. Who loved it most. When it was usually made. My mama's sweet potato pie recipe that came down from her grandmother in Mississippi. Earl's favorite peach cobbler that I perfected over 20 summers. The red beans and rice I made every Monday because that's what we did. Not for anyone's approval. Just so that someday, someone would open this box and hear my voice in their kitchen. That evening, Imani called. They're quiet, she said, meaning her parents. Good, I replied. I think they're waiting to see if you'll come around. I laughed softly. Let them wait. She was quiet for a moment. Then, you're really not angry anymore, are you? No, I said. Anger's a fire. It needs oxygen. I stopped feeding it. What's left? Space, I said. And silence. And peace. She liked that. We talked a little longer about school, her friends, the new book she was reading. No heavy subjects. Just a real conversation. One that didn't circle back to guilt or negotiation. After we hung up, I found myself thinking about legacy. Not the money, not the house, not even the trust, but the feeling I was leaving behind. What would they remember? Would they say I was kind? Strong? Distant? Cold? Maybe all of it. But I hoped most of all they'd remember I stopped letting myself be used. That I found the line where giving becomes losing. And I stepped back. The next day, I went to the library on Bull Street, checked out 3 books I'd always meant to read but never had time for. When I walked out, the sun was high and the breeze carried jasmine from someone's garden. A small reward. At home, I started another letter to Imani. Not about the trust this time. Not about Calvin. Just about life. I told her about the books, the pancakes, the recipe box. I told her I was thinking about starting a new flower bed in the front yard. Something colorful, wild, unkempt. I ended it with this. Don't wait for someone else to tell you your life has value. Decide it does, and then live like it. I sealed the envelope, added a stamp with a little hummingbird on it. Cheerful, busy, unbothered, and as I walked it out to the mailbox, I realized something. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting to be chosen. I had chosen myself. It rained for 3 days straight. Not the loud kind, not thunder and flash and drama, but the soft soaking kind that makes everything slow down. The kind of rain Savannah does best, turning the streets into mirrors and making the moss drip like the whole city is crying gently about something beautiful. I spent most of those days inside. Reading, writing, moving from room to room with no real urgency. There was something comforting about hearing the water on the windows, knowing the world outside was doing its own quiet work of renewal. I didn't hear from Calvin or Tonya. And I didn't wonder why. On the second night, I sat down with a pad of paper and started something I hadn't done in years. I wrote a list of people I hadn't spoken to in a long time. People I'd let drift away because I was too busy being needed by the ones who didn't value me. Friends I'd stopped calling because Tonya didn't like them. Neighbors I waved to but never invited in. Sisters from church I used to sit with every Sunday before Calvin started scheduling things over my mornings. Even my cousin Pearl, who lived 2 towns over and had always sent me a card on my birthday, even after I forgot hers twice. I decided to write them. Not to explain, not to apologize. Just to reconnect. That's what I was learning. Freedom isn't always about cutting ties. Sometimes it's about retying the ones that mattered. The ones you let fray while holding up the wrong end of someone else's rope. I started with Pearl. Dear Pearl, I wrote. I've been quiet for too long. Not because I didn't care, but because I forgot I was allowed to have a life of my own. It felt good. The next morning, I received a delivery. Not flowers, not guilt gifts. A basket. Inside, honey, tea, a jar of homemade jam, and a folded note. Imani. She wrote that she'd made the jam herself. Blackberries from a neighbor's fence. That she thought of me when she tasted it because it was a little tart, a little sweet, and totally itself. I smiled at that. She added one more thing at the bottom of the note, almost like a whisper. You're the kind of woman I want to become. I sat with that sentence for a long time. Not because it flattered me, but because it reminded me that nothing I'd built was wasted. Not the meals, not the patience, not even the mistakes. It had reached someone. It had shaped someone. And that mattered. That same day, I finally opened the drawer with Tonya's letter, the one I'd tucked away weeks ago. I didn't reread it. Just took it out, walked it to the fire pit Earl built in the backyard out of old bricks, and lit a match. It burned quickly. No resistance. Sometimes closure isn't a door slamming. It's just deciding not to carry something anymore. That evening, I sat by the window again, tea warm in my hands, and watched the rain slow to a stop. The garden would be drenched by morning. But I didn't mind. It needed the soak. Things grow better when the soil's been softened first. Just like people. The next day, I went to the garden center again. This time I bought wildflower seeds. The kind that bloom where they want, how they want. No order, no pruning. Just color and stubbornness. I came home, put on my gloves, and scattered them in the front yard. Let them surprise me, I thought. I didn't need control. I needed life. And life, I was learning, was best lived uncontained. Somewhere along the way, I stopped expecting the apology to fix anything. That's the thing about clarity. Once it arrives, it doesn't need ceremony. It doesn't ask for a stage. It just settles in quietly, like a truth you already knew but didn't want to speak aloud. One morning, I woke up and realized I hadn't thought about Calvin or Tonya in 3 whole days. Not once. Not when I opened the mailbox. Not when I cooked. Not even when I passed the corner of the kitchen where Tonya used to leave her purse every time they visited. That space didn't feel haunted anymore. It felt available. I'd started filling it, little by little, with my own things. A small stack of cookbooks I actually liked. A radio that only picked up 2 stations, both of them full of gospel and joy. A bowl of peaches just because they looked nice in the morning light. That was the biggest change, I think. I started putting beauty where the ache used to live. I didn't do it all at once. Just one corner, then another. A drawer here, a frame there. Not out of some grand need to reinvent myself. Just a quiet reminder that I still had taste, still had preferences, still had a life worth shaping. Imani noticed first. She came by with a pile of books from her literature class and stopped short in the hallway. "Did you move the chairs?" she asked. I nodded. They never really belonged there. Always too stiff. "It looks better like this," she said. And then, with that soft curiosity I'd come to admire in her, "Do you feel different now?" I didn't answer right away. But later that evening, I thought about it. Did I? I wasn't lighter. Not exactly. The past was still there. The memories didn't vanish. But I felt steadier. Like a house that's finally been repaired after years of patchwork. Nothing flashy. Just sound, solid. My own. That weekend, I got a letter from Pearl. 3 pages, front and back. She wrote about her arthritis, her neighbor's runaway cat, the church choir's new director who insisted on contemporary songs that sounded like someone yelling underwater. "Lord have mercy on that man's arrangements," she wrote. She also wrote this: "I don't know what made you reach out after all this time, but I'm glad you did. We forget we have choices. Then one day we remember we can call someone who makes us laugh. And just like that, the world gets wider again." I cried reading that. Not from sadness. From recognition. That was the thing, wasn't it? The world was wide. But I had made mine small, trying to stay wanted by people who only saw me when they needed something. Now I was letting it widen again. Imani and I started walking in the evenings. Nothing far, just around the block, sometimes through Forsyth Park when the fountain was lit up and the Spanish moss turned silver in the lamplight. She told me about her friends, her plans, a boy she liked who didn't like her back. "Which is fine," she said, "because I don't want to teach someone how to see me." That stopped me in my tracks. I turned and looked at her. Really looked. "You already know that." She nodded. "You taught me." And I suppose I had. Not with speeches. Not with lectures. But with choices. By saying no when it counted. By choosing peace over performance. By walking away without burning down the house on my way out. That night, I wrote her a new letter, slipped it under her windshield when she wasn't looking. In it I wrote, "Strength isn't what people see when you raise your voice. It's what you learn to carry quietly, and more importantly, what you learn to set down. I watched from the window as she found it the next morning. She smiled, didn't even open it right away. Just tucked it into her bag and drove off. She trusted the words could wait. The wildflowers started coming up that week. Just small green shoots, brave and messy, with no sense of direction. I bent down, brushed the dirt gently, and smiled. No one told them where to grow. They just decided to. A letter arrived addressed only to Mama. The handwriting was Calvin's. Not as careful as the last time. A little rushed, a little messy, but still his. I opened it without hesitation this time. I didn't feel dread or hope or anything that asked for an emotional investment. Just a quiet curiosity, the kind you feel when someone you used to love knocks softly from a distance. Inside, 4 short paragraphs. No excuses. No apologies either. Just a reflection. He wrote that the house felt different now. That Imani talked to him less. That Jalen had started asking questions, not accusing, just observing. That Tonya cried sometimes, not from guilt, but from fear of what they'd lost, of what they couldn't get back. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He asked for understanding. I know now that there's a difference, he wrote, between being sorry and becoming different. I'm trying for the second one. He ended the letter by saying he'd stopped looking at the bank app every morning. That the silence in that space used to feel like punishment, and now it felt like the only honest thing they'd shared in years. I folded the letter once, set it on the counter. Didn't rush to answer. Maybe I wouldn't at all. Not everything requires a response. That weekend, Imani brought over a pie she'd baked herself. The crust was crooked, the filling too sweet. But it was the best pie I'd had in a decade. We ate it at the table I used to dread, the one where too many tense dinners had played out like bad theater. But now it was just a table. Just 2 women eating pie and talking about things that had nothing to do with survival. Do you think you'll ever invite them over again? Imani asked. Maybe, I said. But not until I stop flinching at the thought. She nodded. Didn't push. Later, she helped me rearrange the guest room. Not for them, not anymore, but for a new purpose. I told her I was thinking about turning it into a quilting room, or maybe a reading space. A place that wasn't about anyone else's comfort but my own. She smiled and said, that sounds exactly right. We moved the bed to the far wall, took down the bland art Tonya had once gifted me. Neutral tones, Vivian, so you don't have to think about it. And opened the curtains wide. The light that came in was real. Not perfect, but warm. And I realized then, I hadn't just taken my life back. I'd remade it. Not out of spite. Not out of rage. But out of clarity. People assume reinvention is loud. That it's grand, dramatic, public. But mine had been quiet, private, almost invisible, except to the people who bothered to look. I hadn't shouted anyone out of my life. I'd simply stopped holding the door open for those who kept wiping their feet on the welcome mat. Imani found one last photo in the drawer. An old Polaroid of me and Calvin years ago, both of us laughing at something out of frame. I was holding him by the shoulders and he was looking up at me like I could fix anything. She held it up. You want to keep this? I looked at it. Yes, I said. But not in the hallway. Where then? In the quilting room. In a drawer. For me. Not for show. Imani understood. She always did. That night, I sat with a piece of paper in front of me. Blank. Clean. I wasn't sure if I would write Calvin back. But I knew this much. Whatever came next would be on my terms. Not because I was punishing him, but because I'd finally learned how to protect peace like a precious thing. Because it is. It didn't end with a grand gesture. No tears, no reunion, no last-minute apologies under rain-soaked savannah skies. Life rarely gives you that kind of symmetry. It ended, or maybe continued, with a choice I made in silence. I mailed the photo back. The one Imani found. Me and Calvin, laughing in a time that now felt distant but still real. I didn't include a note. Just the picture, in a plain envelope, addressed in my handwriting. The way I used to label his lunchbox in 2nd grade. Let him decide what it meant. That was the thing about healing. It wasn't about getting even. It wasn't about being understood. It was about being able to stand in your own house, look around, and say, "This is mine. No one else gets to rewrite it." Imani helped me finish the quilting room. We painted the walls a soft green. Not trendy, not tasteful by anyone's standards but mine. Just warm. I ordered a second-hand armchair, the kind that swallows you whole when you sit down with a book. We strung lights around the window and bought a rug that didn't match anything else in the house. And for the first time in years, I looked at a room and saw something that reflected me. Not the version I showed at dinner tables or in polite conversations. Me. That quiet space became my favorite part of the day. I'd go in, close the door, and sit. Sometimes I read. Sometimes I quilted. Sometimes I did nothing at all. Just existed in a place that didn't demand anything from me. The wildflowers bloomed. Not all at once. Not in a perfect pattern. But steadily. A riot of color right there in the front yard where anyone walking by could see. People noticed. Neighbors I barely knew complimented them. A few left notes in the mailbox. One woman from church even asked if she could take a picture. Of course, I said. They're not private. Just unbothered. Imani laughed when I told her that. That's you now, she said. Unbothered. Maybe she was right. The truth is, I didn't become someone new. I just stopped shrinking inside someone else's comfort. I'm not angry anymore. I'm not bitter. Those words don't fit me. But I'm not available either. Not for manipulation. Not for performance. Not for being softened just to be tolerated. I love my son. I always will. But I won't be his lesson anymore. That's his work now. As for Tonya, I don't hate her. I don't think about her much at all. She lives in a different world, one I'm no longer applying to enter. Imani comes by often. Not because she has to, because she wants to. We talk, we eat, we plant things, we tell the truth. She told me she's thinking of moving away after college. Not to escape, but to grow. She said she wants to build a life where she never has to shrink herself to keep someone close. I told her I'd visit. She smiled and said, "I'll hold you to that, Grandma." And I hope she does. The house is quiet again. But it's not lonely. It's full of things that matter. Letters, books, music, flowers, time, and my voice. Not raised, not shaky, just present. If you've made it this far, maybe something in this story belongs to you too. Maybe you've been told to be small, to stay grateful, to accept crumbs and call them kindness. Don't. You're not too much. You're just enough for the life that actually fits you. So go plant something wild. Say no and mean it. Take your seat back. And when the silence finally settles around you, let it remind you. You were never asking for too much. You were just asking the wrong people. If this story spoke to you, share it. Leave a comment. Tell me what you've stopped shrinking for. I'm listening.